10B or not 10B? That is the question China asked this week as they caught their first orbital booster. The Chinese Long March 10B was not the only rocket to make big moves this week as the launch market continues to accelerate around the globe.
The dark side of the moon is not the only laser light show these days as space laser technology advances. Laser optical communications has become a critical component for space communications, but we're starting to see a plethora of other applications arise as well.
There's no wind in space, but that won't stop the ESA from tilting at windmills with their Don Quixote spacecraft being assigned a manufacturer. Further out, the U.S. advances its plans for the Martian surface with new contracts for landers and rovers.
Welcome to this week's episode of Space Times Podcast. As always, I'm Harrison Lambert,
here with Paul Mayer.
Excited to share this week's space industry updates with you. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe to our newsletter if you want the written breakdown of our episodes emailed to your inbox every Monday morning. Drop us a comment on our LinkedIn or Blue Sky with anything you enjoyed or would like to see. And as always, listen weekly on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack, or wherever you're receiving this signal.
This week, we had the privilege of interviewing Tyler Ritz and Ian Silverberg, co-founders of Peregrine Space. We'll start with an excerpt from that interview before returning to our regular programming of launch, communications, and interplanetary updates. Well, Tyler and Ian, thank you so much for joining us here for an interview with Space Times. We're very happy to have you. We are joined today by the co-founders, the CEO and founding engineer of Peregrine Space. And we're really excited to chat, learn more about what you're doing, learn more about the traction and progress that you've made over the past several months, and see where it's all headed.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, to just kick us off here, why don't you give us the Kármán line view, just 100 kilometers here. What is it that Peregrine Space does? What are you, what's your secret sauce? What are you knocking out of the park that nobody else can do?
Yeah, cool. Perhaps very an interesting turn of events, very different answers for both. But I think starting with the goal, right? Our vision is delivering 40 terabits a second anywhere on Earth. And hopefully we can extend that number out as we, progress and develop future technologies, as frankly, data center tech kind of becomes more and more advanced. I think that number will increase. But right now, 40 terabits a second anywhere on Earth. And what we do differently, what we do better, I think fail fast is obviously a thing that has been kind of thrown around the last maybe 10 years or so. But I think we take that to heart. I think we develop in a way that is both capital efficient, but also scrappy and, really pushes the limits of how quickly you could develop a laser communication system. I think we are trying to solve the problem from a few different perspectives, and hopefully we can get into that as we progress today.
Walk me through effectively who or what is your beachhead market? What are the sort of first revenues that you're targeting? And what are some of the first sort of contracts and some of the early traction that you have and are executing towards?
Yeah. So right now on the network side, we're in talks with a handful of companies, right? It's more on the commercial side of things, although we do have a government customer interested actually in comms and geo, which is kind of cool and exciting. We're currently working a contract for them. So that's a longer term one. But we'll see how that one kind of works out based on their requirements. However, in the shorter term, right, we're actively supporting RPO missions in terms of mission area, think defense centric in particular. So those kind of customers, those kinds of missions, we're launching as early as next year on one of these contracts, and it is for the Corvid payload. Not a lot of folks interested in the secret side of things yet. We have it there. We know that it's a pain point in the industry. It's a more simplified version of Corvid, so it's kind of cool. It gets us, additional TRL. And an additional understanding on some of the electronics, but Corvid's kind of an interesting spot. More news on that over the next couple of months. I think we have a customer looking to buy them for LaserComm. Actually, something interesting and unique to Corvid. We're already selling 2 variants, which is kind of fun and silly, but we kind of dropped the LiDAR for later versions of Corvid, right? So we have Corvid 1.0 and 1.5 right now that are available. Right. 1.5 drops LiDAR and RPO. It is hardcore communication, right? That thing is 100 to 400 gigabits a second. It communicates in all the modern ways that we modulate light, right, in a small loaf of bread sized package, which is fantastic. But Corvid 1.0 is still very capable, right? It can transmit at 100 gig. Unfortunately, it can only receive at 20 gigs. So the difference between the two is just the detector. However, in terms of who we're selling to, right, generally speaking, the RPO market is largely led by defense contractors and the government. There's been a lot of demand. Originally, we didn't expect to get such large orders for the RPO side of things. However, growing concerns in the space defense side of things has kind of led to much larger order quantities than we had originally planned for, which is a good problem to have. But an interesting fallout of that, right, is if you are using Corvid as a LiDAR solution rather than just ranging, which it's fully able to do, it can get you very high resolution kind of surface data, right, of something that you're looking at. Maybe it's an asteroid, maybe it's the ISS, whatever. It can generate a lot of data, right? It can generate well over 16 gigs per second. And so now it's starting to create a new issue of, well, buses in general have not really planned for this level of data transmission, especially not from GEO directly to Earth. So now we're kind of in this interesting scenario of we have a state-of-the-art LiDAR capability, and now we need a state-of-the-art laser comm capability to get that data moved around. And guess what? You have both in the same package. So that's kind of interesting and unique to Corvid, but perhaps the most interesting thing that someone might be asking is, what's going on under the hood? Well, like, what is it thinking? Like, what does the payload itself do in this kind of scenario? How does it know where to send the light? How does it know, like, where to receive light from? Like, is it all host controlled? Do we have to, like, feed that data to the host and then re-ingest that data? What's the con-op, right? And so we're pretty excited about how we've developed Corvid. Corvid is leveraging a lot of like modern cloud computing algorithms, actually. So for reference, cloud computing, right? You might have a processor. You may be a data center provider that you're renting out space on to these different server racks or these different processors themselves. And when those processors aren't crunching numbers, you're losing money, generally speaking. So how do you mitigate that? Well, you start to create algorithms that allow you to assess your current usage and who currently is in demand of this processing core, right? Or maybe multiple cores. And so that's kind of similar to what we've got going on inside of Corvid. Every single payload has an atomic clock. Every single payload has the ability to forward propagate the entirety of our constellations. We're calling it our flock program. So if you join the flock, right, we're basically sharing the data across the flock. So if you launch 10 Corvid payloads, and let's say another mission provider launches 10 Corvid payloads, maybe you both sign on to the flock, which means you both agree to allow each other to pass data through those terminals, which allows us to expand our network, like offering and availability, without having to pay for our own satellites. It also lets us buy back bandwidth from these customers and kind of mitigate the cost of these payloads. But it comes with the cost on our end of having to figure out all of the aforementioned usage.
Right. How are you sort of weighing those two so that you're not effectively becoming beholden to the U.S. defense market, so that your customer concentration isn't becoming a major risk factor?
Yeah, I think in the end, and even working into 2027 and 2028, we're pivoting towards mostly commercial. But perhaps I'll kick the can to Ian to talk a little bit about some of the traction that we've seen on the government side and the growth, frankly.
Yeah, so Tyler alluded to it a little bit earlier, but we had a customer who kind of reached out to us, knowing Tyler's history and knowing what Tyler can do, to say, hey, we have this problem, can you solve it for us? And that was initially an RPO ask in terms of, hey, you've got precision timing history, and like Tyler alluded to, the 4.5 big rocks of powerful laser, sensitive detector, like all that he went through. And then they came back to us later and said, oh, you can do comms in the same box. Let's buy more of those boxes. So to your point, Paul, there is a big government acquisition that is very interested in some of the work that we're doing, both on the RPO side and on the comm side. And moving through 2028, we've got government customers looking for hundreds of units a year. And into 2030, we have a customer who has warned us that they want 1,000 to 5,000 units a year starting in 2030. But moving out of the government side, we do have a number of commercial partners who are looking for just as many, just for comms terminals for their own uses. One of the great things about our tech being gimballess means we can send data without having to shake the rest of the bus by moving a gimbal. So we have some customers who have very sensitive detectors capturing images or doing any number of things on the commercial side that say, hey, if I'm transmitting data, and historically that means I'm moving a gimbal, I can't be collecting data. So we're able to increase this company's uptime just by saying you can get all your data out at the same time you're collecting it. And that drives their ceiling of uptime from 30% uptime to potentially 100% uptime.
Also think you're going to proliferate globally, or do you see more regional demand for your solution?
Right now, there's a lot of regional demand. The United States is behind. Frankly, Germany and France are way ahead. The ground station side of things. And so I think if we entered the European market too early, we would get eaten alive. Right. So while I think there's demand, and I think there are certain countries that could use it more than others, certain ones that maybe want to step up their game on a like a transactional basis, right? We have lower latencies, higher data rates. We can get you stock trades faster, right? So there are countries that are hungry for that, like Italy, right? Who wants to grow and participate in the global economy, but maybe doesn't have as direct access as like the United Kingdom that has the gold standard, right? A direct fiber line to the New York Stock Exchange, right? A little bit of favoritism shown there. So I do think there's opportunity, but I think right now in the short term, expanding over the United States is critical, and we only need a handful of ground stations over the U.S.
And to your point, Tyler, and to your question, Harrison, we don't necessarily need global coverage because we're not trying to solve the problem for everyone. We like to say we're trying to solve high data rate communications for anyone, but not for everyone. But because we know exactly who we're servicing, such as these big corporate like Equinix or Panthalas or AT&T, between specific locations, we don't have to solve the traveling salesman problem between someone picked up the phone and they want data going somewhere, right? I don't know where that person is calling from, and I don't know where that data is going. So we need this huge proliferated network, both in space and on the ground, to be able to get that data from anywhere to anywhere. But if we're servicing corporate buildings, hey, we've got a ground station on roof A and a ground station on roof B, we know exactly what that route is going to look like every time. So we don't necessarily need tens, hundreds, thousands of ground stations or satellites.
Tyler, Ian, thank you both so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure hosting and chatting with you today. Absolutely fascinating work that you're doing at Peregrine. For all of our audience and everyone listening, who do you want knocking on your door? How can we help you out? What are you looking for? Who do you want to talk to? Let us know.
Let you go first, Ian.
If there's any government customers who need fancy lasers for comms or RPO, have them talk to us. Otherwise, commercial market needing comms or RPO. Think someone who's trying to send up bits and pieces, assemble them in orbit, and then communicate with that new satellite. We can do the assembly coordination, let's say, with the RPO, and also spin us around, and we can do your comms too. So that whole market.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're also interested, honestly, in expanding our partnerships, right? We have a partnership with EphemerisNet, who is a startup trying to build networks in space. They're focusing primarily on endpoints, right? So if you're looking to join the greater network, right, join the flock, please do reach out, because we genuinely do think that there is more data that needs moved around than we can potentially service with all of the existing companies in the world. So genuinely, this is a bigger problem than even just us. Let's work together on it.
Great. Well, thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Ian, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure learning about Peregrine Space.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us, guys. This is fun.
Thanks, guys.
This week, our main topics include launch, communications, and interplanetary. To kick things off, China made a big splash by not splashing into the ocean this time. They launched their Long March 10B with an actual recovery attempt that succeeded. So the Long March is a long-standing line of rockets that the Chinese State Space Agency flies. The 10B is its first reusable variant. So this week they tested catching the 10B with a novel ocean-based cage kind of system. So instead of Falcon 9, which is the only other functioning reusable rocket currently, well, not currently anymore, but up till this week, it uses landing legs. Same with the New Glenn. Not the same with the Starship. Starship uses a chopstick catch system, which we've seen other Chinese rocket companies use. But this is the first time I've seen a cage system be used by anyone. It uses a pretty novel concept where it has these cables that kind of stretch across a box. And as the rocket lands within the box, the cables snag little catch rods underneath the grid fins that control the descent of the rocket. And so they test out the system and it worked. It worked great. And so now China has a reusable rocket, second in the world to be operational. We'll see how long it takes before they start doing operational cadence, but all signs point to it going well. There might be some tweaks being made. Some of the videos showed some black plumes of smoke coming up, likely just from a composite interstage burning. So likely not, a large failure, but probably something they'd want to fix, at least to make it easier to kind of refurbish the rocket before flying it again. But overall, it looks like promising start to China's reusable rocket program.
Yeah, I would imagine that we would see some figurative, if not literal, fire lit under the U.S. in some capacities here, because the U.S. has been the global leader in reusable launch for however long. And now knowing that there is somebody who has done end-to-end the whole value chain here, I think that is a sizable motivating factor for additional capacity, additional capability. In so many words, now knowing that we are no longer the only people in the world to be able to provide a reusable rocket and solve reusable launch, because we're not the only nation with that capability, I would expect to see a lot of pressure and, if not government spending, government incentives towards increasing the cadence and increasing the inventory of launch and capability, so that, well, if other folks are able to do this, they're only able to do this to, they're only able to do one launch for every 10 of ours.
Yeah, the U.S. launch capabilities seeing pressure domestically, as well as SpaceX kind of shuts down their transporter program. But we still have some transporters flying until 2029. Nobody's able to book past there. So, they continue to fly for currently manifested spacecraft. And this week we saw Transporter 17 launch 81 payloads to orbit. So slightly less than the last transporter, although it seems like it's because there's a lot of bigger spacecraft on board. Of note are a couple of satellites being launched by a couple different companies. So a big one is the Muon FireSats, the first two going up. These are in conjunction with Google's FireSat program, but Muon's the manufacturer and operator. This has been a long time coming for this program, so it's great to see them finally get on orbit. The other two interesting ones are the Posidonia satellites from Open Cosmos. They launched the first 2 of 7 on this transporter mission, which grows the constellation of Open Cosmos. I think when we talked to them back in March, they said there's around a dozen satellites on orbit. This is for a Greek fire control constellation, but it joins the constellation of Open Cosmos. And they even had an update this week on their Open Constellation program that has reached version 1.0, and they're able to deliver rapid insights from their interconnected constellation of satellites. I believe under 30 minutes is what they're claiming on the upper end of responsivity. So, a great feature for For Open Cosmos, I think Firesats are also equipped with the Placer terminals, so they should also have rapid insight capability, which is pretty key for fire responsivity here. It's kind of like what we saw out of Aurora Tech's releases after they launched with Kepler earlier this year. So great to see a lot of Firesat capabilities being deployed, because it's one of the best use cases of satellites for kind of altruistic purposes. A couple other satellites of note are Planet's Pelican 11. So this is a demo mission for the Pelican, which is a larger Earth imaging satellite than their traditional Doves. This has a 50 centimeter resolution, which is pretty high, not as high as like Black Sky Worldview, but they claim that they can get up to 30 centimeters, which is the state of the art and would compete with Black Sky and Worldview as well. Expect to see more Pelicans. They last week signed an agreement to launch one of them on an ISAR rocket. They're manufacturing them out of Germany. So this is just to kind of test out the satellite capability before they deploy at scale. The other kind of demo mission is the first Apex Nova going up. This has been a long time coming as well, as we keep mentioning with Apex's news releases that they have very little on-orbit heritage. So this will add to that, which will be great as they kind of scale out to their core offering, which is rapid development and manufacturing of spacecraft. The other satellite I want to call out is the Bohr satellite going up from City Labs. So this is the Beta Voltaic Orbital High Reliability CubeSat. So it's a 1U CubeSat that contains a tritium battery on board, which is the first commercially launched nuclear battery to go up. This is a bit different than the nuclear power plants we talked about, kind of in the scope of the moon. It's not a plutonium, uranium kind of thermal isotope generator, but it is a power generator that uses tritium to create millivolts, or if not nanovolts, of power. So nothing on the scale of high power nuclear capability, but it is a interesting kind of first step to using nuclear on orbit, as it's been largely avoided until recently. So it's cool to see somebody actually deploying this. It's at such low power ratings, it's only really useful for powering kind of key components. They're calling out like payload heaters, which is a good use case for this. It could help with survivability of some spacecraft. But really, it's a great demonstration of being able to use nuclear on orbit. On the European side of things, the ISAR launch company has had another announcement this week. Last week, we talked about them signing with Planet to launch a Pelican on board of their Spectrum spacecraft their Spectrum rocket later this year. This week, they announced a $112.5 million deal with the Maritime Launch Services company out of Canada. This is to develop a dedicated Spectrum launch site in the Nova Scotia launch base for Canada. So this is an interesting development. As last week we talked about Firefly flying out of Sweden's S-Range and France's Latitude rocket company flying out of Oman's Etlock launch site. So continuing with this interesting trend of rocket companies kind of exporting their launch vehicles to other countries, this is a deal between Germany and Canada to launch ISAR out of there. I find it an interesting deal, not just because they're exporting it to Canada, but it does give them a couple of different options for launch sites, both of which are pretty much for polar orbits. So I don't actually see why this benefits ISAR. They're already launching out of the Norway's Andoya spaceport, which is great access to polar orbits because it's high latitude. Nova Scotia similarly gives them access to polar orbits. I would have expected something more like a deal with Alcantara launch base out of Brazil to give them equatorial orbits, or even Etlock out of Oman, since Latitude kind of set that precedent, which would give them also equatorial access. So yeah, great deal for Maritime Launch Services. This is $100 million from ISAR to kind of expand their capabilities there.
Yeah, I mean, Maritime Launch Services is they are a player that I'm familiar with, that we as a neighboring launch nation are familiar with. There's a lot of they have a lot of allies and sort of support in the U.S. government, knowing that we only have 2 major launch sites, 3 if you want to include out of Texas, but we only have a very limited number of launch sites here in the U.S. So having nearby sort of redundant and allied launch sites is a net positive for everybody. So it's great to see MLS getting some traction and some contract revenue here. Though, sort of to your point, I'm also a little bit unclear as to how this helps ISAR. maybe there really are some. I mean, we spoke when they scrubbed their second launch for the fourth time, that maybe there were some unique challenges to launching out of the Andoya spaceport. That maybe there was something there that was causing technical or fluid challenges that maybe we hadn't considered. But the Nova Scotia launch site would be, if memory served, it'd be at a fairly comparable latitude. So, I'm not super clear as to what's going to be totally different here, but I'm sure ISAR knows what they're doing, and I'm sure they're very excited to have the dedicated Spectrum launch site out there. Though maybe they're just sort of planning on achieving scale more rapidly than not.
For new kind of technology, Venus Aerospace raised $91 million led by Mercury Fund. So Venus Aerospace is a rotating detonation rocket engine, which, if you know me, gets me really excited. I think that's a really cool technology. We got to talk to Juno Aerospace a couple of months ago now. They were developing rotating detonation combustion for orbit. Venus Aerospace is one of the few companies developing it for rockets and launch vehicles. The other few are like Honeywell and not General Electric. But this is one of the few kind of commercial venture funded companies to pursue this avenue. Rotating detonation rocket engines have had a long time coming. It's very hard to scale them up to the size needed for launch vehicles, but Venus has tested this, has done flight testing with it last year, like May 2025. So all signs point to their technology being viable. The $91 million price tag, indicates that there's a long road ahead for them to actually deploy this sort of technology. But, the thing that gets me excited about this is that, we typically see like a 15 to 30% increase in efficiency for these rocket engines over traditional combustion engines. So it's one of the few things that could kind of make a step change in access to space through traditional launch vehicle technology. So congratulations to that team. I hope to see them fielding launch vehicles soon, although it seems like they're positioning primarily towards hypersonic testing and rocket technology, and that should help them move more towards that launch vehicle capacity.
Yeah, I managed to get the privilege of chatting with the CEO of Venus Aerospace, Sassy Duggleby, a few years ago, and when we spoke, they were talking more about the aerospace, like aeronautical implications of the RDRE technology. And I think some of that, this was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I think some of that was the influence that some of their earlier advisors and investors may have had, having more of a background in aviation than in space itself. But the clear implication for Venus Aerospace's RDRE technology for launch capacity is really impressive. Because of the way that the rocket equation works, mass and fuel requirements scale basically exponentially. So reducing the fuel requirement in order to achieve launch by any amount provides outsized returns. So massive implications for the industry as a whole, and I'm very happy and excited to see that they've achieved the round of funding that they have.
For launch vehicles that are a bit closer to flying, we have the United States Space Force awarding the National Security Space Launch Phase 3 Lane 1 to 2 more companies. So this joins 5 companies that were already awarded. Blue Origin, SpaceX, and ULA were awarded back in 2024, with Rocket Lab and Stoke Space joining them in 2025. So this year we have 2 more joining, one being Relativity Space. Not really a surprise there. But the one that I find more interesting is Impulse Space. So the National Security Space Launch is a program for national security payloads, things that are kind of top secret. It's been a huge boon for SpaceX as they keep winning them, because companies like ULA and Blue Origin, their rockets keep having problems. And so a lot of these contracts keep going to SpaceX to launch those because they have to keep operating on the same timeline. But the money kind of flows in advance of the mission. So it helps fund these companies and their development. In total, they claim they manage about $15 billion in launch contracts each year. So that's kind of the order of magnitude we're talking about. For this phase 3 lane 1 award, it's $5 million to both Relativity and Impulse to develop the technology needed to meet these contract requirements. So for Relativity, that will help develop their launch vehicle. For Impulse, it will help develop their Helios kick stage. So this is a second stage sort of rocket propulsion technology, but it's on the spacecraft side of things. So it moves a satellite from LEO into GEO orbit rather than moving it from the Earth into orbit. So interesting expansion upon the program. I think it goes hand in hand with Impulse raising $500 million a few weeks ago. So far, they've only flown the Mira spacecraft, but the Helios is under development with their Deneb rocket engine being built for that spacecraft. So between the $500 million in funding and this NSSL award, that should go a long way for Impulse to actually fly Helios. And it's great to have customers that will actually use it, as the U.S. government is one of the few that places satellites into GEO orbit. So this will give them a good backlog of customers to actually use their Helios. Lastly, for launch, we have Maya Space winning a multi-launch contract with Loft Orbital. So Maya Space is a French launch company. They are flying their Maya rocket in 2028, and they announced that they have a multi-launch contract with Loft, which fills out about half of their backlog. So they're looking to consolidate the customers they're flying, and they bid to kind of have a good manifest of companies to actually fly once the rocket is operating. This very much reads like a French sovereignty sort of play, Loft Orbital being a primarily French satellite company, partnering with Maya Space, which is backed by Arianespace, which is the European launch giant. It's kind of like the ULA of Europe, but Maya Space being a newer kind of rocket, smaller than like the Ariane 6, being able to fly these sorts of payloads. So definitely an interesting development, especially after we saw ISAR sign a contract with Planet last week. It seems like a lot of these European smaller launch providers are starting to try to sign customers to show some demand for their launch capability.
I think you're right to assess that this is largely one of the European sovereignty plays. I would expect France and Europe to still need to contract out launch as they would with basically any and all capabilities as necessary. But I think that launch is sort of the key bottleneck that we need to see sort of solved at a greater both cadence and capacity, so that we're not, as a space industry, effectively throttled here by how many seats there are available to get up to orbit. It very much looks like they are focusing explicitly on the reusability side of things. So we're already seeing out of Europe, we're already seeing additional new entrants and new players come in to try and not necessarily keep up, but to catch up to the recyclability and reusability of the capabilities that we see out of the US and out of China. On to the communications segment, SHALE has signed contracts with both Turksat and Thales Alenia for the SHALE 3 satellite manufacturing. Now, this satellite is built to rely on the Space Inspire platform. It's Thales' platform for similar projects. And the Qatari satellite project will be a new generation of purely software-defined geo communication capabilities. So the goal here is to provide broadband connectivity and communication services to Europe and the Middle East. Their software-defined solution will allow them and provide a lot of flexibility in the product offerings and these service offerings that they have on demand. And Thales they own the design, the manufacturing, the testing, and the ground segment, as well as the associated services, which sort of sounds to me like they're going to both build and, for the most part, operate the satellite on Qatar's behalf. But this is scheduled for a launch in, I believe, 2028.
It's good to see there's still being some geocom satellites, even though obviously there's a movement towards micro geo being more popular.
Closer to home, the U.S. Space Force has awarded Pulse Space a $40 million contract for laser-based space power technology. This is really interesting for a couple of different reasons. One, it's the largest award or contract for Pulse Space to date, but it's also one of the largest granted to a company at Pulse Space's stage. Why this is interesting is because it indicates a shift in the U.S. government's acquisition strategy and acquisition policies. Traditionally, a $40 million contract to a company at Pulse Space's stage would have been unheard of. Pulse Space is way, way, way too nascent for anything that we've seen prior to, I'll say, 2015. But the fact that they've won a $40 million contract, which is largely intended to help them develop the actual technology that they will be selling, represents a massive shift in how the U.S. government, Pentagon, Space Force, it represents a massive shift in how the U.S. government is actually deploying capital. And the clear prioritization is to enable smaller, more rapid, innovative companies and innovative technologies to try and get capability in the U.S. government's hands faster than not. This is a trend that we've seen playing out in real time for a good while. This is a wonderful example of that in one specific instance here.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting technology to be funded by the United States Space Force's, space solar power is kind of a nascent industry. And I honestly hadn't heard of Pulse Space. I keep hearing of Starcatcher when it comes to space power, like laser-based space power technology. So Interesting for them to come out this way. They are launching a spacecraft within 3 months. So they're pretty far along. It'll be interesting to see how that spacecraft performs, although it might be that we don't know how it performs, given that it's probably for national security purposes. But this is a huge vote of confidence by the U.S. government towards this technology. I find it interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it seems like Space Force is getting more interested in laser technology. We talked about the Golden Dome, like direct energy weapon, a couple weeks ago. This week we talked to Peregrine Space, and they're talking about using lasers for LiDAR on top of using it for comms. And this announcement was that it was for space-based power, but also for space domain awareness, which makes me think that they're using this as like a dual-use application where the laser can be used for LiDAR as well as for power generation. It's cool to see lasers serving multiple different purposes through space, as traditionally it's been for optical communications. But space-based power is interesting kind of technology to develop. They say their spacecraft is 30 kilowatts. It can transmit over 1,000 kilometers. So I don't see how that's the most useful for some applications. I mean, that's, you can't go from GEO to LEO at that distance, but you could go LEO to LEO. Sure. So be interesting to see kind of what their proposition is. But 30 kilowatts is pretty good, at least for this first round of things. It's on the higher end of power that we talk about with satellites. So really interesting technology to watch.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the fact that this contract award is explicitly intended to develop the technology itself means that maybe the applications of power transmission and space domain awareness are not the only applications that the U.S. Space Force potentially sees for Pulse Space's technology that they're developing. But that would be pure speculation as to whether or not the space-based power is intended to be more laser-based space power.
Yeah, I wonder if you could use it like offensively, just like overcharge somebody's solar arrays so you blow their power conditioning unit.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Space Force had some sort of inklings of exploring those possibilities as well. Sticking with optics, Ravi Optics raised a $6 million seed round. This round was led by big global investment, and this will help Ravi build out their ultra compact optical terminals for satellites. They are another player entering the intersatellite link market. Government spending and signaling has been pretty consistent and pretty sizable for the past year, really. That intersatellite links, optical communications, and space domain awareness were all critical components for the proliferated warfare network, and for the functionality and execution of a lot of the Golden Dome missions. And so, while obviously Revie Optics was not founded in response to that, a lot of that government signaling and a lot of the spending and signaling out of the US government has effectively de-risked the space for more commercial investors and markets. So it's good to see Revie Optics, who I believe is out of Ohio, but a company out of the Midwest getting a $6 million seed round. That's not very common out of the Midwest. So this is an outsized round of investment for such an ambitious goal. And so it's great to see this playing out in real time, the effective forecasting and de-risk of a technology and market as a result of some of the things that the US government is saying and doing in the space industry. So Revie Optics' vision is similar to some of the other folks that we've seen in the optical ISL segment. In so many words, building a network, getting their terminal on as many satellites as possible, not necessarily building out the satellites or platforms themselves, but proliferating their terminal onto as many satellites as possible, and then providing effectively a networking service as a result. We have seen this, and I have seen this and heard this from my days in the VC world, from the vast majority of people working on and building optical terminals. It's great to see more people entering the market, though the service providing layer won't necessarily be winner take all. It's really unlikely that satellites would adopt multiple optical terminal providers for the sake of having sort of auxiliary capabilities. I would imagine that folks would just pick the one that does what they need for the mission, and then would dedicate the rest of the swap budget where necessary to optimize for the payload and for revenue generation. Not necessarily going to be a winner take all, but the possibility for more collaborative solutions, those more collaborative paths forward are going to be a little bit more limited, because it's so much more likely that each satellite winds up sort of beholden to the one optical terminal provider and the network that they're running. SpaceFlux raised an additional £3.5 million of funding to their seed round, bringing the total seed round raise to about £9 million. The extension was led by their current investor, Blackfinch Ventures. The extension also brings in Tokyo-based Sparks Asset Management as SpaceX pushes into the Japanese market. So some strategic investors on board, helping them with their go-to-market strategy and their global expansion. The raise will help push SpaceFlux's AI-backed product lines and will help SpaceFlux fulfill some sovereign deployments to allied governments in and around Europe. On to some of our more interplanetary updates and efforts. Firefly Aerospace was awarded a $13 million NASA JPL subcontract to build the aeroshell for the Skyfall Mars mission's Martian lander. Firefly will manufacture, test, and deliver the aeroshell in line with NASA's Skyfall mission, which is on track for a late 2028 launch date. I think this is really interesting for a couple of reasons here. The first of which is that this is such a small contract. So Firefly just won the CLPS contract for, I think it was $144 million, but 10 or 11 times what this JPL contract is. And so what Firefly is doing is they are developing the aeroshell. They're developing this effectively new and innovative technology out of their own GlowWorks Innovation Lab. And they're going to be manufacturing it in Texas, doing all of this work in Texas with some of their main facilities. But what it demonstrates and is an example of is the pattern of rapid innovation being rewarded. So traditionally, the way that space has gotten capability into the government's hands has been either directly through government funding, which has gone really slowly and has never been able to keep up with the cadence or pace of the well-funded private sector, or has been through some of the major primes and some of the major prime contractors who would then win a major contract and then go out and basically headhunt and source and scout to find some of the subcontractors that were doing new and innovative things. Now, traditionally, there's always been a certain risk hesitancy. There's always been a little bit of unwillingness to try something completely new and novel. And so what we're seeing is a fundamental shift of that, similar to the Pulse space contract that we discussed previously. But NASA and the U.S. government are leaning on and leveraging public-private partnerships much more than they have previously. And in order to help capture on that, Firefly Aerospace has effectively developed their own innovation lab, which is functioning more or less as a innovative lab. It's a venture studio. It's an accelerator. It's an incubator. So we're seeing this sort of VC backed model play out in the macro in how the U.S. government is partnering with VC backed companies and partnering with the VC industry in order to get innovative capabilities to market faster. We're also seeing the larger incumbents. We're also seeing some of the new primes that are entering the space themselves adopt that same model internally. I would not at all be surprised to see R&D within some of these new primes, within some of these big players, wind up looking a lot more like a VC-backed model. In so many words, I would not at all be surprised to see the Firefly Aerospace and the Loft Orbitals and the Apex Spaces and Intuitive Machines adopting effectively their own corporate venture capital arms in place of R&D and standing up internal incubator or accelerators in place of more discretionary R&D funding. So it's a really interesting shift to see here. And even though it's a small contract, it, I think, belies a much more transformative part that the entirety of the space industry is starting to shift and adopt more of a VC-backed model throughout.
Yeah, I think it reflects the kind of urgency that NASA has shifted towards to develop these interplanetary capabilities. I think this VC-backed model is much more speculative, and they're trying for moonshot capabilities rather than R&D being focused on new business models that could generate more revenue, which I think makes sense given a lot of these NASA contracts are large but on the smaller side of things, and enabling new technology that doesn't play into the primary capabilities. So Firefly's still trying to get to orbit. Their Alpha rocket hasn't gone back to launch. So being able to work on some of these moon and Mars-based missions is best done kind of in this siloed way. And, I think this contract was particularly interesting because the last two contracts they got were for a lunar lander and the Elytra Dark lunar drone. So to give them a Martian contract as well kind of splits their focus even further when at a time when I think they should be really focused on their launch vehicle. But if they're able to kind of break this apart in a certain way and they have enough funding to kind of develop things independently, I think it's a lot more feasible for them to kind of approach multiple different avenues of development. I will be interested to see if this aeroshell plays into any other technology like reentry technology or their Elytra Dark drone. But given that the Martian atmosphere is different than Earth's atmosphere, not quite as challenging, it might just be the first move on some Martian technology, which is something we've been seeing more recently. Like Relativity got a Martian contract from NASA. Electron or Rocket Lab has their Mars missions that are also contracted through NASA. I just find it all interesting given that SpaceX has kind of shifted its focus from Mars to the moon, and every other launch company has now gotten some form of Mars kind of contract. So I'll be curious to see if competition for Mars heats up in the time it takes for SpaceX to figure out the moon and then shift their focus back to Mars.
Speaking of NASA has awarded a series of STRIDE contracts for Mars Advanced Surface Mobility Technologies to 7 different recipients. The Science, Transport, and Robotic Innovation for Deployment and Exploration contracts have been awarded to AeroVironment, Astrobotic, Venturi Astrolab, Ground Control Robotics, Honeybee Robotics, Intuitive Machines, and MEI Technologies. Each of these awards have a potential value of roughly $17 million and are slated to begin in the fall of this year.
Like I was saying, it's interesting to see NASA put out more contracts for Mars, especially with all their so much focus being on the moon. It's a great collection of companies. I mean, a lot of them companies that have already kind of been involved in a lot of lunar capabilities. So makes sense that they would try to expand that to Mars, although they're not very similar environments. But things like lunar landers and rovers should in theory be transferable, especially after we had that Promise rover being reassigned from Mars to the moon.
Right.
So companies like Astrobotic, who just got acquired by Voyager, and Astrolab, who are working on their rovers. We have Honeybee Robotics that have worked on like space station assistant robots, and of course Intuitive Machines being a large lunar player. I think it's great to kind of have them spend some of their time focused on Mars capability as well, even though it's a lot earlier than the moon. I think it's good to have them looking at this now, so that as they develop lunar technology, they can design it so that it's flexible to multiple environments. Since the next step from the moon is Mars, and it might be a little while out, but it's best not to have to go and redesign everything after we figure out the moon.
The ESA has awarded Spanish company EMXYS a contract to build the Don Quixote lander, which will land on the asteroid Apophis as it passes near Earth in April of 2029. The Don Quixote lander is the first CubeSat that is designed to actually touch down on an asteroid. It's scheduled for launch in spring of 2028 aboard an H3 rocket and is intended to capitalize on the scientific opportunity as Apophis passes through our geo-orbit range. It's going to whiz past Earth at about 32,000 kilometers. Great opportunity to try and get some close observational data on Apophis, and hopefully get the Don Quixote lander on site to take measurements and send those recordings back.
Yeah, this is great to see another asteroid mission. They're pretty rare. We've had OSIRIS-REx, I think was the most recent out of the US. Japan has great heritage of the Hayabusa missions. ESA, not so much. They had some cool ones when they went to the Comet, which I feel like is a pretty similar mission profile. But this is an interesting design. Having just a CubeSat touchdown and take measurements is a little less ambitious than what the US or Japan have done. But the more info we have on these asteroids, the better. I think a lot of the asteroid mining companies are still at the stage of they want to survey asteroids to figure out how they interact with them, and the more data we can collect about it, the better. So, great program. I think they have such a small satellite probe for the same reason a lot of other programs had small satellites. It's just the amount of mass to get up to the speed to match the asteroid has to be pretty low. I find it interesting they're launching on board an H3 rocket, which is Japan's rocket, rather than like an Ariane. Maybe just because of the scheduling, but probably because the launch capability. Overall, a fun mission, one to watch. It'll be great if they can make contact with the asteroid. That should help, advance this kind of capability.
Speaking of Japanese launch, iSpace, not to be confused with the Chinese company of the same name, has increased the size of their cargo order to scale with Starship's increased capacity. In a deal worth roughly $50 million, iSpace has booked 500 kilograms of cargo capacity on a Starship launch for a moon mission that could be undertaken as soon as 2030. They are aiming Starship to transport their mobile cargo system to the lunar surface. It's a 500 kilogram platform that is able and capable of transporting itself roughly 500 kilograms of payload across the lunar surface. iSpace is also planning multiple lunar missions with their Ultra Lander vehicle, which are currently scheduled in the lead up to the mobile cargo system launch in 2028, 2029, and 2030.
The price point on this is what stands out to me the most. I mean, it is interesting that this is one of the first contracts I've seen with Starship. I mean, they haven't really talked about using Starship for anything other than Starlinks. So this is a really interesting kind of development here. I don't know. The first thing that popped ahead is like, how are they going to deploy a rover out of that Pez dispenser system that Starship has? But I think by the time Starship lands on the moon in 2030, they'll finally have the clamshell design worked out. So, I think they're not going to have to adjust their form factor for the current version of Starship. I think there's also a lot of like speculation here as to what the price point will actually be. Currently, it's usually $1 million per kilogram of cargo to the moon. And so this is an order of magnitude decrease in that. I can't imagine SpaceX is just going to eat that difference. So it must be that they're expecting that to actually be the cost, which is in itself a huge kind of announcement for lunar travel. If SpaceX can really bring that down to it's $100,000 per kilogram, that's really good. Getting 500 kilograms of cargo to the moon is a huge boost to the kind of capabilities that we can accomplish. I know last week we talked about Lunar Forge and some other lunar, I think it was like Pulsamac or something, doing lunar kind of construction. Yep. None of that happens without this price going down. I would hope for it to go down another order of magnitude, but then we're talking about like the current cost to get to LEO kind of scales. No doubt we'll get there, but there's a long path ahead for Starship to reach that number. I just find it impressive that they're already convinced they can get it down to $100,000 per kilogram by 2030.
Yep. On to some of the business moves. Boy, am I going to have to cut myself off on this one. But MDA has acquired the Earth analytics company Collect Localization Satellites, CLS, out of France. And this is a massive acquisition. This is really big. So MDA announced their intent to acquire Blue Canyon Technologies for roughly $600 million US, largely funded with debt. I believe it was earlier this month. It might have been 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
Recently announced, recently acquired. They have now announced their intent to acquire publicly traded company CLS for 567 million euros, I think. So roughly the same price. Two companies that they've acquired for roughly 600 million US apiece. Both are going to be largely financed and funded with debt. MDA is claiming that this will put them at a roughly 2x, 1.5x to 2.5x debt to EBITDA ratio after both acquisitions. The challenge here is that CLS, their acquisition of CLS is expected to more or less double their revenue year over year, meaning that would sort of also double their EBITDA year over year. So they're levering up to roughly 4x their organic EBITDA, but they're basically planning to lever up substantially. And so, 4x debt to EBITDA is really high. 2x debt to EBITDA is much more manageable. But the difficulty here is that, half of the EBITDA that they are counting on is EBITDA that they have bought. It's effectively CLS's EBITDA. All of that to say that this is a big swing that sounds really familiar to MDA's acquisitions of Digital Globe and Space Systems Loral. We already sort of beat that dead horse when they acquired Blue Canyon Technologies, but they've now also acquired a French company that expands into the European market. So there's a lot of more business level corporate strategy potential, I'll say, risks associated with this, with their ability to execute on this deal. However, the upside is immense. The upside is massive here as well. So it's a really big swing. Their acquisition of CLS, like I said, will basically double their revenue year over year. It will gain them access to the European market in a way that they don't currently have, despite Canada's warming ties with the ESA and with European space. Additionally, they are vertically integrating past the hardware stage. So Rocket Lab goes from launch all the way through the entirety of the satellite service providing. MDA is going even further than that here. Well, not further going from launch. They're not vertically integrating all the way to launch here, but they're going further down the value chain, integrating past the hardware itself to the data analytics and the operational insights that CLS provides. So they would be looking to basically sell their MDA would. They'd be looking to sell their existing satellite constellations and scale their Chorus constellation by selling their existing products to CLS's existing customers, which is largely a scale strategy. And so they are very optimistic about the upside and where they can go with things, selling their products to CLS's customers, ingesting CLS's revenues themselves, and also adding those product lines and capabilities to their own markets as well. So there's a lot going on here, but it does make for a very ambitious corporate strategy that will be difficult to execute on. MDA is now effectively simultaneously trying to enter both the US and the European market. They are doing so by simultaneously incorporating new products and new core competencies into their product suite. They now provide the hardware and the satellite manufacturing sides of things, but they are also now incorporating the analytics, the downstream AI, and the downstream Earth observation results into things. So there's a lot of opportunities for error, but in the greatest contrast to their Maxar play back from the mid 2010s, the industry that they are buying into now has massive tailwinds as opposed to massive headwinds. So the biggest challenge was back in 2016 or back in 2017. MDA bought into the geocommunication industry, which was on the tail end of a boom. So they bought high as the industry went into a down cycle. The growth that they were anticipating did not materialize. They are currently buying into a market that has been growing very rapidly and does not show signs of slowing. So it's a big swing, and they are going to be levered, and it is going to be difficult to execute on, but they've got a lot of favorable tailwinds. The big risk here is that should those favorable tailwinds change or start to dry up, they could find themselves in a very similar situation to what happened back in 2017.
Yeah, I see them kind of repeating that same mistake. The Chorus and the Aurora platform seem to be what they're targeting for expansion right now. The Blue Canyon purchase to me is buying up the supply chain for constellation plays, whether that's Aurora or Chorus. Doesn't really make a difference with the kind of hardware that Blue Canyon builds. But with this CLS contract, it does very much read like they're trying to build out their Chorus platform, which is something they're self-funding. They don't really have an announced customer for it yet. So it makes sense if they're trying to sell the end product and just own the hardware themselves. I see that as a big bet. And I think a lot of what they're betting on is that the SAR market continues to be hot in Europe, which it has been, but I don't know. I just feel like they're a bit late to the game again. But my issue is more just like, how much SAR does Europe need? Overall, this is $1 to $2 billion of debt. We've seen larger contracts for SAR exist. I mean, the ISI Rheinmetall one comes to mind. I just feel like there's not enough demand for SAR for there to be another big deal like that for them to kind of make up the cost here. I think, moving into the US sector as well with the Blue Canyon acquisition makes it a little more interesting, but we still haven't seen the US kind of come back to SAR. They've kind of soured on it last year, and there hasn't been a whole lot of demand for it since. And so it's really just betting on Europe. I could see them using their Aurora platform more for the US, but again, it's a huge bet. Just like the cooperation between Canada and the US hasn't been great in the past year. And so either they're betting on that getting better or betting on the US being more open to foreign kind of involvement in key technologies. Feels like they're trying to divest away from Canada, not counting on Canada being a large moneymaker, or they've kind of tapped out that market for themselves. I think they'll have more luck in Europe than the US, but even there, like ISI has dominated so well in the SAR sector. And every other country that's not using ISI has kind of created their own consortiums that are fully European companies. And so I just don't see how MDA fits into that ecosystem. As well as Europe and Canada have been cooperating on space technology, I just don't see them kind of ceding this technology to a Canadian company. They seem very dead set on developing their own SAR capability. Either MDA kind of breaks that mold or they find a niche layer in there that they can operate. So maybe CLS is a good play. Maybe they could create a platform that sort of aggregates data from a bunch of different SAR satellites. But given their history with RadarSat and the plans for Chorus, it very much seems like they want to own the entire stack, like deploy their own hardware and whatnot. And so it just seems like a lot of money to go into debt before you even spent all the money needed to deploy these satellites. So I think, the only way this pays off is if they do get some big contracts out of this.
Speaking of corporate strategy, Voyager has closed a $250 million upsized credit facility led largely by JP Morgan. Voyager continues to make acquisitions throughout the space industry, and the credit facility more or less gives them a $250 million sized slush fund to continue that sort of spur of acquisitions. Most recently, they acquired, I believe, Astrobotic, which indicates that they may be sort of focusing in on more of a lunar and moon-based strategy here. But prior to Astrobotic, their acquisitions have been pretty varied, largely looking to acquire different components and different suppliers for what they sort of view as key problems and key bottlenecks for the industry as a whole. Sort of similar to the Redwire strategy that I'm sure we've spoken about previously, but it'll be interesting to see what they wind up leveraging that $250 million into, whether they're looking at making sort of one big swing, one big play, or whether they're wanting to go out and use that credit to acquire multiple different players in the lunar ecosystem. But Voyager, I don't think Voyager has won any of the major CLIPS or Artemis contracts yet to date, have they?
Well, they won the CLIPS through Astrobotic.
Oh, they did win no, that was...
Last week, Astrobotic was one of the CLIPS. They actually won 2 of the 4.
That's right. Astrobotic was the $250 million.
Yep.
We'll have to see how they want to sort of step up on that, as really their acquisition strategy has been largely sort of buying different individual component suppliers and different sort of bespoke solutions providers, seeing them as potential key technologies, and then making a big swing for the lunar ecosystem with Astrobotic. So we'll have to see who they wind up going after next, and whether it winds up being a series of other sort of smaller individual contributors towards this grander vision, or whether they take another big swing or two.
Do you have any bets
for Voyager at $250 million? I wouldn't be super surprised if we see them go after an Instinct Space or a Lunar Forge, some of the new players that are looking to scale into the lunar ecosystem. I wouldn't be surprised to see them, in so many words, looking at building additional sort of space habitats or space infrastructure, more specifically for the lunar ecosystem. But I would think both of those would represent pretty small plays. Who would you think they'd go for a big swing?
I think Gitai. I think after Rocket Lab acquired Motive, Gitai is one of the remaining big players there, and actuators are a critical component. I think Motive is just the first move there. I think Gitai is primed for an acquisition, and it's a technology that would benefit Voyager's whole stack, whether it's lunar capabilities or space habitats or moon base or anything. The other sector I see them lacking in is their sensor capability, kind of like how Firefly bought Space NG. Although I can't think of any company that's not already acquired or is big enough MDA bought Blue Canyon, so it doesn't really rule out a big company selling a portion of their capability to Voyager, but I wouldn't be able to guess what that would be. But my guess is either a robotics actuator company or a sensing company.
So you think they'd still be focused on the supply chain side of things, still focused on the individual components?
Yeah, if they follow the Redwire playbook, which it seems all indications seem that they are, it's going to be a component acquisition, like a critical key component that not only can they use, but they can sell to other competitors.
Who would you, if you had to pick a bigger swing, if you had to pick a big player, something more akin with Astrobotic than an individual component supplier, who would you throw your chips on?
Maybe a rocket company. Could see like Phantom or Vaya. I don't know why they would buy it, other than like it shores up their vertical stack, like a Stoke Space. But they got almost acquired by OpenAI, and that was a larger price tag than this. So,
what was the Stoke Space price tag from OpenAI?
Like close to $1 billion, and they still rejected it.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just the acquirer they didn't like, but yeah, I don't see them lacking in a whole lot of capability. And I mean, given their founder and their mission contracts, it really seems like they're trying to build out something in between Redwire and Intuitive Machines. So I would basically be seeing like, what is the gap between those two companies that Voyager would need to fill? And to me, it's actuators and sensors. Like they've already got SDs for solid motors. They've already got Bridgecom for optical communications. They don't have an electric propulsion provider, so maybe that. Actually, I could see that, especially after those lunar contracts that went out for like the hybrid electric chemical thrusters. So maybe like that Revolution Space Company or Quantum's going public, so not them. I forget what the third one was. But yeah, I could see an electric propulsion company. Maybe like Busek. I've been expecting them to get acquired any day now. And that's probably the right amount of money for that kind of company.
Yeah, I feel like the Redwire playbook is largely unfocused. I don't know if that's the right word to use here, but
well, like one of the things is sensors are kind of one of the key components to everything, and we've been seeing that expand a fair bit recently. But and it comes to like RPO and like landing craft and stuff, but Redwire has a pretty strong hold on the sensor level of space technology. Like their sensor is used in a large majority of missions. So I'm expecting somebody to step in there and kind of unseat them. Like TRL-11 is one of the only other companies I've seen to create sensors that are comparable. Like Starfish has used both Redwire and TRL-11 sensors for their RPO capabilities.
Sure.
But I haven't seen many other companies pursue that. And, like the Space NG acquisition signaled that there's demand for that kind of capability. I just don't see many companies that can fill it.
Right. But I mean, so Redwire isn't like, they're not out here trying to win the sensor. Like they're not out here trying to build a horizontal play in the sensor market or in the sensor segment. Like,
no, I just see them like building the best capability and key components.
Right. But it's like, I guess my point is that like, depending on how you define key components, depending on how you evaluate that, it can look like a very sort of, I'll say like value-based acquisition strategy. So the portfolio can be like pretty diverse within space, which can be valuable from an investment perspective, but from like a corporate strategy perspective, if you have like one or multiple plays that provide propulsion solutions, or one or multiple plays that provide this, that, or the other solution, like you still want to be executing something in vision of your larger strategy, which I haven't necessarily seen out of Redwire. They've been very effective at what they've been doing. But I think a lot of their success is more a function of the fact that the space industry is nascent enough to where there's not enough people there's not enough players doing what Redwire is doing for them to effectively to where a more, I'll say, like generalist strategy at Redwire's level is still competitive.
Yeah.
So I like all of that to say that like I would imagine that Voyager is, they've had a little bit of a generalist strategy for the first couple of years of their acquisition play. I would imagine that they want to be a little bit more targeted and a little bit more specialized for the moon race. And so, like, I think you are calling out excellent candidates for them to go after, and excellent components and systems for them to go after. And yes, the purchasing or acquiring Gitai or an propulsion propulsion solution, a hybrid chemical electrical propulsion solution, like, yes, those are going to have valuable contributions to the moon and to the lunar effort. But I wouldn't think that they were like super explicitly focused on that there's going to be a lot of other sort of applications that they can have outside of the lunar race. I would hope that Voyager would be looking to acquire on a very like targeted and specialized strategy here. And I would think that sort of a vertical play around the moon would be the best way to go about it, largely in agreement with you.
Actually, they just haven't seemed focused though.
But that's the challenge. Like, that's what I hope they're going to do. I
don't think they want to be.
I think they may just throw a couple of darts though.
I think they want to be embedded in every aspect of space. They're not trying to play out one particular move. Like, even their Starlab effort is a series of consortiums. It's not like they bet all their chips on that capability. Like, they were one of the most diversified away from space habitats when NASA made their shift.
Yeah,
I think it's intentional. Like, I don't think they want to focus on one thing.
No, they definitely are. They definitely know what they are doing. So it's not like this all just sort of happened by accident or by happenstance. This happened because this has been their goal.
I agree. It's best for a company to be focused, but I think there are exceptions to that rule. Yeah. And the ones that we see do that are usually like an aggregate of leaders in the industry that can basically do what they want and raise the money they want. Like, Redwire is an aggregate of different NASA leaders. Voyager's the same. Like, they have the head of the ISS in charge of Voyager. And it's the same with like Ghaffarian's collection of companies.
Ghaffarian's collection of companies is very focused on the lunar ecosystem. They've been going out of their way to win as much of the contract stack, I'll say, for the lunar ecosystem as they could. So
I'd say he's the most focused, but it's still
sure
like a collection of, like, together. If you had all four of his main lunar companies together, it would look a lot like a Redwire or Voyager. It's not like you could put those four companies together and suddenly have your moon base or your lunar habitat. You would have most of the pieces for it, which is basically what Voyager and Redwire would do. Like, Redwire supplies a lot of stuff for the ISS. I don't think they could put together their own ISS, but they would have most of the pieces for it.
Yeah, that's true. I think that Voyager and Redwire's strategy is much more generalist and much more generic than Intuitive Machines. But I do take your point.
Yeah, I think the other maybe target for acquisition would be solar power. I just realized they don't have one yet. So maybe like a Star Path.
Oh, that could work. Blue Origin has announced the intent to raise $10 billion at a $130 billion pre-money valuation, led by, quote, asset management. Ooh, how do you pronounce that? Coatue? Coatue?
Coatue?
I'll go with that. Led by Coatue Asset Management, contributing $4 billion, and Bezos's $2 billion. The round will focus on rebuilding their launch infrastructure, scaling and executing operations for the Artemis missions Blue Origin is now focused on, and executing on continuing to launch satellites for Amazon Leo and delivering on their orbital data center aspirations. I think the fundraise announcement is really interesting because, to my knowledge, Bezos is basically the only person on the cap table for Blue Origin, or has been to date. And the fact that they're pursuing not public, but that they're pursuing external private capital is a pretty interesting signal. Effectively, on some level, Bezos thinks that the equity he is selling is not worth the price point, that there's money to be made there. So, if Bezos is choosing to sell the equity to other investors and is doing so for financial reasons, he's doing so because he thinks the investors are overpaying for the equity. There's very much reason to believe that that's not what's going on here, that Bezos thinks that, hey, it will be really helpful for Blue Origin to get other investors, to get other people in the room, and to get this, that, or the other sort of network or connection in here. So in so many words, Bezos could be sort of effectively selling the equity for less than he believes it's worth, and is doing so effectively paying a premium to get the sort of other value, the investors and the fundraise outside of just the capital itself. Interesting nonetheless. I mean, 10 billion US, I do not understand how you spend that on rebuilding your launch pad. But I guess if you're building like an Italian marble launch pad, it's gotta, the money's gotta come from somewhere. It's unclear how that 10 billion is going to be allocated to execute on their missions, but clearly getting New Glenn up and getting the launch cadence back on schedule is necessary, both to deliver on their LEO constellations and to achieve their Blue Origin's own orbital data center efforts and ambitions as well.
Yeah, I'm really not a fan of this announcement. It just feels like Bezos sees the market and sees easy money and thinks like a business person before an engineer. And having more stakeholders at the table at the stage they're at just further divides their focus. Like, this is an example of a company that's not very well focused, but probably on accident and not on purpose. Like, they have a launch program that still hasn't launched fully. They have a lunar program that still hasn't landed. They have a telecommunications constellation company. So to compare them to something like SpaceX going public, who've been around for less time and have been operating rockets for 15 years and operating Starlink for almost 10 years now, or 5-6 years now. It feels like they're going to just lose even more focus, because they're going to look at all these businesses that are losing money and be responding to business minded to all of them. So either cutting the investment where it's needed, or focusing on one thing and then another and jumping around too much. I just feel like SpaceX was smart in how they built a rocket, then they built Starlink, and then they built their lunar lander. It's very much like they focused on one thing at a time and they executed properly. Blue Origin has not done that. And so I don't like it, because it also takes a lot of money out of the rest of the industry for a company that doesn't need it. Like, Bezos has plenty of money to continue funding it, but to pull 10 billion out of a public market that could be going to other companies in the space industry, I don't think is a good thing. I don't think it's going to bring up the whole industry as a whole. I think what's going to happen is they're going to raise 10 billion. They're going to continue faltering at executing. Their stock's going to drop, and it's going to pull the whole industry down with it. And it's basically fighting SpaceX for valuation. It doesn't seem to me to add any value to Blue Origin. It just seems to be a way to get some money in for a company that doesn't really need it and just needs to execute and start making money rather than just spending it.
Yeah. I kind of alluded to this with the joke about the marble launch pad, but the fact of the matter is that Blue Origin does not have money problems. They have quality and execution problems. They have, I think, the second or third, but I mean, they've got Bezos's billions at their back, right? Like, they don't actually need the public money at all. If this is the most cynical view of it, I would agree with you, is that Bezos sees the market, sees how frothy it is, and goes like, hey, free money. Why not? And that would undoubtedly be a net negative for the space industry, because Blue Origin has not been deploying capital super efficiently, because they haven't been executing super well on anything. in large part because they've been focused on a lot of different things simultaneously. They're executing more in parallel than in series. And to your point, SpaceX was very diligent about executing on their milestones in series, one at a time. So, there's a lot of glass half empty downsides to this announcement for the space industry as a whole. I would think the most favorable or gracious reading of this is that Jeff Bezos is trying to bring in additional expertise. Kochu Asset Management doesn't read like a company with a whole lot of space industry expertise. They read more like a private equity or late stage growth capital firm that's throwing around a whole bunch of money, trying to return money to the pensions that are their LPs themselves. So it doesn't necessarily bode well for their ability to leverage this fundraise into somehow better business development or growth. And so I have difficulty seeing how Blue Origin is going to take $10 billion and one, deploy it responsibly, and two, see how that capital is going to effectively solve the execution challenges that they have. They're trying to do a lot of different things. They're trying to do them all at once. And as a result, they're underperforming a little bit in sort of everything. So like, if they're going to take this 10 billion and then turn around and restructure the entire company and focus everything on getting New Glenn up, and then focus everything on delivering on Amazon Leo's satellites, and then focus everything on delivering on the Artemis mission contracts and the lunar mission contracts that they're focused on, like that could potentially work. But that feels like more of a strategic restructuring than something that's truly capital intensive.
Yeah, and I just don't see how you get to $130 billion valuation. Like SpaceX makes about $4 billion a year on Falcon 9 launches, and they launch over 100 rockets a year. Blue Origin's launched 0. Like even if you're like, oh, in a year they'll be launching as much as SpaceX, which I would doubt heavily because it's a larger rocket. Where are they going to find that many customers? It's still worth like a third of what they're valuing it at. And even if Leo's operational, it's owned by Amazon. So it's not like Starlink generating SpaceX money. It's them manufacturing, which is a much lower like revenue target. Yeah. So I don't see. I mean, I'll be interested to read their S1 because I want to see how they justify $130 billion. They have no like AI segment to prop up the valuation like SpaceX does. Like they're a much more pure play space manufacturer than SpaceX. And I just don't see I think Rocket Lab's like $30 billion valuation. That's more on the order of what I would expect Blue Origin to be valued at.
Really?
Yeah.
I would not. Like Rocket Lab has way more assets in orbit and has done a lot more.
50 billion for Rocket Lab. I don't know, does
I don't know. I feel like Rocket Lab has a better track record to date than Blue Origin.
Yeah, better execution. The only positive I can see to this is if this is for the moon. Blue Origin really wants their Blue Moon lander to go up against NASA's wishes because they've had to like lobby Congress to get it through. But Bezos seems very focused on the moon. It is a growth sector, but it is very early. So I could see if they want to spend money to try to push that along, but maybe not bet his own money in case it all falls apart again. In which case, I wouldn't mind him spending $10 billion on lunar efforts, especially if it's things like the Blue Ring, where it's a space domain awareness mission, but it supports like half a dozen different companies. They could do something like that for the moon. Then it helps the industry, but not in like a financing, like money generation way. Like it doesn't lift the market, but it does help fund the industry.
I mean, it de-risks the industry and it provides some infrastructural value there. But I mean, one is the price point of something like that, 10 billion US.
For the moon?
Yeah.
I mean, what is that, like 1 million kilograms of mass to the moon? That could get us a moon base.
Sure. I'm skeptical that this 10 billion would be used for altruistic purposes. I'll say that.
Not altruistic, but like Blue Origin's, or at least Bezos' ultimate goal is like move industry off planet.
Yes.
And I feel like he's rushing to that.
Well, I mean, Bezos's vision of moving industry off planet is not necessarily shared. Like, if he's willing to throw $10 billion at his own vision for the moon that runs in conflict with the rest of the lunar ecosystem, like, that's a net negative and is a challenge. So, like, I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's where we're headed. But either way, like, Blue Origin now is about to have 10 billion US in dry powder to deploy. So that's just oh man, they could almost buy 20% of an AI startup with that. It's just an absurd amount of money.
Oh, yeah, what's this new one? Prometheus?
What do you mean Prometheus? What? There's more?
Bezos' new AI company.
Oh my God. Hey, you said that they weren't doing that.
Well, it's Bezos, not Blue Origin.
Yeah. All right.
But like Blue Origin wants to do in-orbit AI, but they're like 4 or 5 years out. Like they have their TerraWave stuff. I mean, I think they announced some sort of like Starmind-esque thing, but
I'm sure the 10 billion will help them catch up to some capacity. Orbit Fab raised 25 million US in interim financing led by Stride Capital. This comes as they announced the appointment of Peter Schaefer as CEO and Roger Teague to their board of directors. They've secured the interim financing and have kicked off their Series B round of fundraising. The Series B will support their continued market expansion, infrastructure deployment, and strategic investments in technology and operations. Under Schaefer's leadership, Orbit Fab is focused on the final qualification and shipment this summer of the first fully integrated refueling architecture for launch in 2027. Orbit Fab is going through an interesting transition period. The way that I would read the interim financing is largely as a negative signal, not necessarily a terrible sign, but interim financing and bridge rounds, people can sort of phrase or frame them how they want, but for the most part, it amounts to we ran out of money or we need more money and we haven't made enough progress to kick off the next round of fundraising yet. So usually interim or bridge rounds of financing are closer to the prior terms of fundraising than they would be the subsequent round of fundraising, which is it's harder on the founders, it's harder on the folks already on the cap table. Then Orbit Fab to have raised this 25 million as part of their Series B. Indicative that there's probably some transitional challenges that the company is experiencing, and the fact that the money is sort of earmarked for them executing on their first demo launch is sort of I would think that sort of is evidence to that same point.
To be read similarly, I feel like they just moved to commercialization too quickly. Like they had really good traction going to their last round. Getting the UK and the US on board with their refueling standard was huge, but it's really just the first step. Like they actually need to get spacecraft up that have that refueling standard on board. I think the RPO capability is still a huge portion that needs to be figured out from a technical standpoint. Until that's done, it doesn't matter if the fuel ports exist if you can't reach them. They flew a sensor on Momentous Disfiguride 7 earlier this year, so at least they're moving towards that goal, but it's an obvious sign that they're not there yet. So I just feel like all of it, like they saw that people were finally willing to buy in to this and thought that now that the lanes are open, but that's really just the first step. And to be able to scale to that size is a lot of hard technical work left, and continue pushing on an industry that's been slow to manifest. I think there's a lot more demand for it recently with like space defense signals. But again, it's hard to reach the critical mass needed to make this a profitable kind of sector. I think you need to win like a big constellation contract or actually have the government agree to fly it on all their future spacecraft. But even then, I don't know. I just don't see, like, 25 million is a lot of money, especially for a bridge round. I still don't think it's enough to get to where they need to be. Obviously not if they're trying to raise a Series B. It just, to your point, it seems like they're doing that under duress. That, I don't know, they might not be able to get something operational. They still have a year left before they can fly a full architecture, which I believe is the orbital reef architecture.
Yeah.
So hard road ahead for them. I think there's a lot of technical stuff still to be proven out, especially flight heritage, and especially with this kind of technology, flying up to so many spacecraft. I don't think anybody wants you doing that unless you've proven it works first on orbit. So hopefully they get the money to actually fly orbital reef, but I just read the whole thing as they were quick to commercialize something that they've been leading to commercialize, but they're still not there yet.
Finally, on the business move side of things, the exploration company has established a U.S. entity to pursue government contracts, opening both a Houston Rapid Innovation Lab and TEC Federal out of Virginia. The exploration company is rapidly pursuing U.S. growth and contracting wins. I think this is a little bit interesting just because the exploration company and the aerospace corporation have so many similarities in my mind, but the aerospace corporation is a nonprofit. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how the exploration company is able to establish a foothold here stateside. But the Houston Rapid Innovation Lab is reportedly intended to help with further testing and development of their Nix capsule, of their Nix platform. And this is off the back of their acquisition, I believe, just last week of who was it?
European Astrotech.
That's right, of European Astrotech, whose testing and manufacturing facilities were also intended to support their Nix capsule. So I would read this as the justification of their Nix capsule being worked on out of Houston, being mostly for show. Like they have everything that they really need, or they should have everything they need locally to work on the Nix capsule and get everything ready. In my mind, their effort to develop the Nix capsule out of the Houston Rocket Innovation Lab is to, or the Rapid Innovation Lab, excuse me. That effort is to sort of set them up and, sort of letter of the law qualify them for more contracts and programs using their Nix capsule and their Nix platform.
Exploration companies making some weird moves. I didn't understand their electric propulsion acquisition. I don't really understand them expanding to the U.S. Like, unless they're planning on moving away from a service module, their Nix platform, neither of these moves really make sense. Like, the Nix platform, like, the fact that it's reusable means they don't need that many thrusters. So I don't know why they would buy a thruster company. And the U.S. already has their service modules for ISS and future habitats. So I don't see what they'd be bidding on. And if it's commercial habitats, we've already seen how they've pivoted away from it because it's not that profitable. And I don't see why they would need to be based out of the US in order to partner with something like Voyager or Vast or something.
No, they wouldn't need to be partnered here for anything regarding their actual Nix capsule. I think what we are seeing is that they're still saying everything is for their Nix capsule, even though they're actually working on something else.
I think they're doing very much similar to what Vast and Voyager are doing, which is pivoting away from human transport systems.
Yeah.
So what is not clear?
No, they haven't announced anything yet. For whatever reason, they're playing it close to the chest.
For tech advances this week, we have a couple. One is that the FCC approved the first Reflect Orbital satellite. So Reflect Orbital is a space solar power company. a very unique approach. They're using mirrors to reflect sunlight rather than microwaves or lasers. So as you can imagine, there is some hesitation from the broader ecosystem about sending giant reflective mirrors up to orbit. The FCC kind of clears the way for that. Granted, this is just a demo satellite, so the mirror is significantly smaller than what we can expect with their larger scale satellite, their actual production scale satellite. So, it's fair to want to test this thing out. I'm just waiting to see how shiny the first satellite is, and whether the FCC continues to approve their deployment. I have some reservations about this spacecraft design. Just the idea of like pointing sunlight anywhere on the Earth is a little, I don't know, odd. Probably doesn't make a lot of people on Earth happy that it can just like beam light from space, and certainly not making astronomers happy. So I'm really curious just to see how the satellite works out, because hopefully they have ways to mitigate effects they're not hoping for. I'm glad the FCC is giving them a chance. I'm just nervous for their approach that they're taking.
Yeah, I think the Reflect Orbital is a fun company. I'm excited to see how they are able to achieve success and proceed. That said, there is definitely more potential for something to go wrong or cause problems. There's more potential for unintended consequences, I think, with what they're working on. So hopefully they're able to thread the needle here and everything goes well. But it's a good sign that the FCC gave them the approval for their first demo set.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised it was the FCC that needed to approve it. I kind of thought it'd be like the FAA.
Yeah, I would have thought so as well.
Or like OSHA. Lastly for today, we have the United States Space Force awarding 13 contracts through their other transaction authority. In total, $500 million for space combat power, which is a very vague umbrella term for whatever these contracts are for, because they're not saying who they awarded them to under national security concerns. There was only one company I saw announce something related to this. I have the feeling they weren't supposed to, and they did anyway. But the other 12 are staying silent as to who they are. I can only glean so much from the one that announced it as to what space combat power means. But the one that did mention that they won this contract was Peregrine, and it's to deliver their DOTS to Space System Command. So DOTS is their Dense Orbital Transfer System. It is about the size of a toaster oven, and it is a hybrid rocket engine that's claimed to fit on a CubeSat, although that's a fairly large CubeSat that can fit a toaster in for propulsion. But it goes from ounces of thrust to pounds of thrust, so pretty significant. Somewhat rare for what we see on orbit, although it's becoming more common. We talked a bit about it with the lunar contracts for hybrid systems that are both chemical and electric. We just talked about it with Impulse Space using their Deneb thruster. And we talked about it with Juno Aerospace using their rotating detonation combustion. So there's an increasing presence of chemical thrusters on orbit, although this one's pretty unique. It's pretty rare to see hybrid thrusters on rockets, which is where they usually show up. So to see it in space, it's sort of an odd choice. It's a mix of plastic for the solid portion of the hybrid rocket and hydrogen peroxide for the liquid. So unique to have a different capability. It definitely seems to play into the space mobility aspect of things when it comes to space combat power. So to me, this reads a lot like space defense in terms of this sort of RPO capability we've been talking about. So being able to move a satellite quickly into place to intercept an adversarial space asset, or to intercept a missile of some sort. CubeSat size also kind of reads like orbital interceptor payload. So I'd expect the other 13 contracts to be for features such as space mobility, new thrusters that can move faster, sensing capabilities and autonomous capabilities, and potentially like focused energy weapons.
Well, that is a wrap for the week's recap of the space industry. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, please drop us a comment, check out our socials, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack, or wherever you're receiving this signal. Until next time, This is Paul Mayer and Harrison Lambert signing off for now.